when I originally heard about this paper and about LLMs being less safe in RAG situations, the thing that popped into my head, I guess, is I was thinking about how it's my understanding is that hallucinations are much less likely in a RAG circumstance than outside of a RAG circumstance for an LLM. So when you have that, to use that word grounding again that you've been using, when you have that grounding, it seems to lead to fewer hallucinations. So I guess in my mind, maybe I kind of and so I'd welcome your input on the hallucination point if that is actually true. But I guess I kind of ended up conflating those two things in my head and thinking, okay, if it's hallucinating less often, then it's surely safer. But yeah, and again, you can cut into my my thoughts on the hallucination in a second, but um, but now it's becoming clear to me. It's becoming clear for me to understand how maybe even if hallucinations are reduced, the issue here is that the kinds of safeguards that an LLM creator put in, say Meta put into some Llama models that they release, those safeguards that are built in a RAG setup often break down.
Exactly what you're saying. That is absolutely the case, where we say, look, there are typically the three H's. They were first developed by Anthropic. Many companies are now adopting them. Uh, the application you're building, it should be helpful, it should be honest, and it should be harmless. And hallucination very much goes into this honesty bucket, which often is also then combined with the helpful, because how can you be helpful if you're not honest? So that if we just focus on being helpful and being harmless, everything that goes into hallucination and the advantages RAG brings to helpfulness, they're vast, and they make RAG a necessity. That's why we're not saying that RAG is dangerous. We're just saying it is not necessarily safer. It is absolutely necessary, but the harmlessness angle is something that is completely separate. And the way that organizations think about it is often to kind of split them and look at them through two different angles, because the helpfulness angle, it's very much grounded in a specific application. Right? Can a question answering system that helps financial analysts answer question and test hypotheses? The answer to that is, does it help them? Yes or no? But there's always this angle of a malicious or an unintended abuse of that system, where the same system that helps people assess hypotheses could then also be used to, right, who is the worst broker and who should I exploit, which is maybe not something that you want to answer in turn. So now we have these two angles, and often you can say, okay, the harmlessness angle is something that is usually consistent across an industry, across a sector, across a domain. There might be some application-specific risks too. And then there's the helpfulness angle, where you provide answers that hopefully help. And here, RAG really helps because it leads to you being able to build things like transparent attribution. So transparent attribution for us means every time I produce some kind of tidbit, some piece of information, I need to ground this in some kind of document or some kind of structured data. If I say the price of Meta is so and so today, then I want to be able to look at that and say, where does that number actually come from? Is it hallucinated, or do I actually know the query that produced that number? If I'm saying, like, the following analyst said the following statement, then I want to be able to hover over this and say, oh yeah, this is where that statement came from. It is not hallucinated. This, to some degree, can prevent the harmfulness or the harmlessness issues as well, but it is a somewhat separate topic, as you were saying. You talk about hallucination, and that's where the big advantage for RAG comes in. But then there's the harmless or the harmfulness angle as well.
Okay, nice. So maybe recap for us again. So there's probably lots of listeners out there who are sold on RAG. Then they're like, great, I want to reduce harmfulness. I want to increase the honesty of my LLM, and so I'm going to use a RAG system. What are the kinds of mitigations? I mean, you went into this a little bit, but kind of recap for us again the kinds of mitigations that our listeners can take home away from this episode to be able to use RAG so that it is safe for their particular circumstances.
Yeah, I think that's a great opportunity to talk about a little bit about how should we evaluate systems. Because in the end, what you see talked about a lot publicly, and probably the most, is benchmarks. and you see, oh, hey, this new model that large language model provider A or B or C produced, it achieves a better score on the large language model arena or on the following benchmarks, and it's better at reasoning, it's better at coding. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's better for all the downstream applications that are being integrated into. And I think we often conflate this kind of view where it's actually really, really important to measure and to evaluate the system in the context it's deployed in. And that includes things like safety testing and specific guardrails. So we also released a second paper, in addition to our RAG LLM paper, where we developed our own content risk taxonomy for financial services, where we say, here are 12 categories of risks that we really, really should address with applications in our area. And for each of these, we can measure, because we can collect data against this and say, okay, here are 100 queries that try and do a financial misconduct, 100 queries that try and make the LLM generate financial advice, 100 queries that try and get at personal information, 100 queries that try and defame someone or create fake information or fake narratives. And all of these categories, you can create data, you can measure it against this, and you can not only test the large language models themselves, but rather you can test the entire end-to-end system that is deployed in a specific socio-technical context. And here, typical guardrail systems, there are a lot of open source solutions. NVIDIA has their own, Llama has their own, Google has their own. They provide open source guardrails. But again, these open source guardrails, they're shielding against these general purpose risks. In our paper, we found that if you apply these Llama Guard or Shield Gemma or Aegis is what they're called, if you apply them to our specific risks, they're classifiers to say, is this input or is this output safe, yes or no? And they also fail in our domain because, similar to our RAG paper, it's just not a use case that people necessarily have thought about before. But it gives us then the idea of, okay, how do we build our own guardrails? Can we have a classifier on inputs and on outputs that identify violations of our rules that we set up ourselves? So now, instead of having a vanilla RAG system where it's retrieval answer, we have guardrail, retrieval, answer, guardrail. And in practice, to prevent hallucination and to add attribution, real systems that are deployed to wide ranges of audiences, they have many more components. And it's really this end-to-end application that should be evaluated and where you need the subject matter expertise to also know, is it helpful and is it harmless?